the black president or the white president.
President-elect Donald Trump, everybody. Meanwhile,
people in Hollywood think that you just put a BLM sign in the window and that means, you know, you're like a saint. And it's like, you haven't done anything. Mm-hmm. What you basically did was appeased your sense of responsibility. What are you talking about? I put a sign in the window. I'm on the right side of history. Or my favorite one was white people marching in BLM marches, filming themselves. Or Instagram, like, look what a great person I am. So it's just like, I don't know. Human beings are interesting.
On the topic of race and political movements, Bill Burr has a thought or two.
All right, we're going to create a new banner. This is a Jumdoc alert.
But of course, that's not all. When it comes to mainstream media,
many of these protests started peacefully with legitimate questions about the war. But in many cases, they lost the plot. The fear among Jews in this country is palpable right now. Protesting the way the Israeli government, the Israeli prime minister is prosecuting the retaliatory war against Hamas is one thing. Making Jewish students feel unsafe at their own schools is unacceptable, and it is happening way too much right now, harkening back to the 1930s in Europe, and I do not say that lightly.
Burr has a straight and to-the-point approach.
It makes my blood boil when I walk into a house with people I know, and if they're watching CNN or Fox, like, I can't get past like, when people watch, like, the Kardashians, it's like, why would you do that to your brain?
Judge Moore has also said that he doesn't think a Muslim member of Congress should be allowed to be in Congress. Why? Under what provision of the Constitution?
Because you have to swear on the Bible. When you are, before I had to do it, I'm an elected official 3 terms. I had to swear on a Bible. You have to swear on a Bible to be an elected official in the United States of America. He alleges that a Muslim cannot do that ethically, swearing on the Bible.
You don't actually have to swear on a Christian Bible. You can swear on anything, really. I don't know if you knew that. You can swear on a Jewish Bible.
Oh, no, I swore on the Bible. I've done it 3 times.
I'm sure you have. I'm sure you've picked a Bible, but the law is not that you have to swear on a Christian Bible. That is not the law. You don't know that? All right, Ted Crockett.
I don't know. I know that Donald Trump did it when we made him president.
Because he's Christian and he picked it. That's what he wanted to. That's what he wanted to swear in on.
Oh yeah, and on the know-it-alls who are elected officials.
I'm so sick of you know, one of the number one ways you know that you're a idiot is that you think you know. That is just the number one thing. Like the confidence that mouth-breathing morons have. The confidence. is astounding. It's limitless. They'll criticize NASA.
Burr has a spot-on take as well.
He may disavow them all he likes, but Donald Trump's allure to racist is rearing its ugly head, and David Duke is one of Donald Trump's biggest and least welcomed fans in Louisiana. Duke is barely getting 5% in the polls, but it was enough to get him on a debate stage and voice his admiration for Donald Trump.
I will be Donald Trump's most loyal advocate to make sure his nominees go to the Supreme Court.
It's been an ongoing problem for Trump, stumbling over questions on how to handle support from known racists.
Well, just so you understand, I don't know anything about David Duke, okay? I don't know anything about what you're even talking about with white supremacy or white supremacists. So I don't know. You know, I know nothing about David Duke. I know nothing about white supremacists. And so you're asking me a question that I'm supposed to be talking about people that I know nothing about.
Even if you don't know about their endorsement, there are these groups and individuals endorsing you. Would you just say unequivocally you condemn them and you don't want their support?
Well, I have to look at the group.
Another terrible moment, on top of many that voters just allowed to go by the wayside. Burr sees another approach on the subject.
So one of the things I've been kind of having fun with in the red states is talking about the Klan and how there's all this stuff you can't do anymore, but you can still join that group. But I go, that's a great example of white privilege. That you can still join a terrorist organization as a white person, and it's protected under this freedom of speech. That's one of the most fun things about doing stand-up, is going to a place like that and doing some stuff like that and getting them to hear it
essentially trolling conservatives in deep red states with his humor. A welcoming message overall.
Chloe Feynman was the one.
Imagine.
I was the one. I got cried.
How people find this show and this guy funny is beyond us. However,
yeah, I do find it weird that how much trouble you can get in for a joke, but you can just have like this unstoppable, insatiable greed. Just the whole concept of a corporation that every quarter you have to make more money or else you're a failure. I don't understand like how these CEOs can just give themselves bonuses. It's like, is that just like legalized stealing from the company? And some other shareholders always seem to have a problem when they're doing something that would be for the common man. But at the end of the year, when they write out bonuses, for some reason the shareholders have no problem that they took all of these profits and put a bunch of it in their own pocket so they could go buy another house. For some reason, that goes under the radar.
Burr does the impossible here, showing how people being offended at jokes is meaningless when they let robber barons like the top 1% rob from them each and every year. It's a full circle moment.
Of national attention, and in case we have forgotten, because we keep hearing that 2014 has been the warmest year on record, I asked the chair, you know what this is? It's a snowball, and that's just from outside here. So it's very, very cold out, very unseasonal. So here, Mr. President, catch this.
The elected officials of yesteryears?
No, I just miss old school politicians. You know, that just sort of gave you a speech, gave you some hope, as opposed to like, you know, now I don't know what we have. There's literally actors out here talking how they want to run for president. Which strikes me as hilarious. It's like, you got this great life, you're making 10, 20 million a movie, and you want to get a job where you're going to have like dead babies on your fucking conscience because the bombs don't always land on the bad guys, and you're going to age like 40 years and you're like, what the would you ever want that job for is beyond me.
Burr says he misses it while proving how devilishly evil they were.
One reason they don't get exposed is because they're afraid to speak out, because it's the only religion that acts like the mafia that will fucking kill you if you say the wrong thing, draw the wrong picture, or write the wrong book.
Oh yeah, and on this guy?
Well, let me ask you a question. How is war still legal? With all this that's been canceled.
Legal.
Why is that still legal?
Would you like a real answer to that? Because for something to be illegal, you have to have the capacity to enforce it. And you can't enforce against war, or else you have to go to war with the country that's going to war. And we don't want to go to war with Russia over Ukraine. What would be the sense of making it illegal? Oh, that's really going to stop Putin. No. To stop people from going to war, you have to also put boots.
You can't sit down and talk it out. Why can't Putin do a podcast with the head guy? Like, you just solved the Middle East on a podcast. Why can't they solve what they're doing on a podcast?
See, this is why this is not your thing.
Make some hard-nosed decisions. It's not your thing. It's what you...
It is my thing.
It isn't your thing.
This is not your thing.
It isn't. You're like that guy that has a fantasy football team and thinks he's a GM.
No.
That's exactly what it is. Like, why am I listening to you like you've done something? What have you done in Washington? Nothing.
Burr does what Katie Porter and more should do. Throw it right back in his face.
Hey, I appreciate you watching. Now, if you can, please do become a channel member by going to youtube.com/TYTsports and clicking the join button. If that's too much for you, you can just go to tyt.com/join to become a member. It helps all of us out here at the Young Turks and keeps our network afloat. In addition, you could follow me on my socials on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Appreciate the love. Have a great day.
In the 1980s, legendary hip-hop group A Tribe Called Quest formed. Since that time, they have been viewed as pioneers of the genre.
You find students going into libraries now and buying African books and all that to learn about where they came from, you know, all over, students all over. Big debates about it now.
And also kids in college are starting to take
yeah.
African courses now also. I'm starting to see that.
More courses are being put into schools, you know. There have been protests in certain schools in America because they don't have African culture classes, and those protests, due to those protests, those classes have been added to the curriculum, you know. So there's a strong movement.
While many view Tribe with jazzy samples infused in their powerful beats, the albums they put out and songs they have written are more than James Brown's Funky Drummer, Lou Reed's Walk on the Wild Side, Ronnie Foster, Rotary Connection, and Cannonball Adderley, to name a few. They were unapologetically themselves, philosophical but not off-putting with their knowledge, confident in themselves but not brash. As Toure wrote, Tribe was vital in helping to spread the Afrocentrism movement to a new, more mainstream generation of listeners. They rapped about Africa, aka the motherland, and excursions, named a song after an anti-apartheid activist, warned us of the industry with show business, asked, "What's America without green and glamour on what?" and painted the picture of surviving in New York City on the track Everything is Fair.
I think the stakes are raised when music criticism understands the world that music is being released into, because that affects the way that music is heard, that affects the way that people engage with it, that affects the way that people escape from the world they're living in or run into it with more vigor. It was important for me to write about A Tribe Called Quest with the same kind of historical reverence that we see the Beatles written about, or we see the Rolling Stones written about. I wanted to give A Tribe Called Quest that same kind of reverence.
Hanif Abdurraqib, a poet, essayist, and writer, spoke with PBS News on the group. His book, Go Ahead in the Rain, Notes to A Tribe Called Quest, is a must-read that we will link in the description box below. Following the color scheme, red, black, and green, Tribe released the Low End Theory, a nod to Afrocentrism. Q-Tip would say, there's a Muslim saying that says, you will be judged by God on whether or not you were a good leader. If you're not, who is? Pointing fingers is a waste of time. It feels represented in his lyrics to many. As OK Player's Elijah C. Watson wrote, Tribe was arguably more subdued with their conscious aesthetic, but they were still equally important while challenging representations of black masculinity, an integral element of Tribe's everlasting aesthetic, a desire to be true to oneself no matter what. The group, consisting of Ali Shaheed Muhammad, Q-Tip, Cherobi White, and Phife Dawg, would go through the highs and lows of mainstream success. After 5 albums that left an impact on hip-hop heads everywhere, in 2016, Phife Dawg would tragically pass away. The cause was complications from diabetes. This was the same time as...
Putin, from everything I see, has no respect for this person.
Well, that's because he'd rather have a puppet as president of the United States.
No puppet.
And it's pretty clear.
You're the puppet.
It's pretty clear you won't admit that the Russians have engaged in cyber attacks against the United States of America, that you encouraged espionage against our people, that you are willing to spout the Putin line, sign up for his wish list, break up NATO, do whatever he wants to do, and that you continue to get help from him because he has a very clear favorite in this race.
The rise of this man in American politics, wrote Eric Thurm. They were inspired to start recording after their performance on Fallon in 2015, another space that helped make Donald Trump appear to be nothing more than a humorous buffoon. They would release We Got It From Here, Thank You for Your Service, on November 11, 2016, just days after Trump won the election over Democratic nominee Hillary Clinton. It was their first album in 18 years. The second track, We the People, features a chorus that the former president himself laid the groundwork on.
They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists.
When he said this of Mexican people.
Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown
of Muslims entering the United States.
This of Muslims, his attacks on the LGBTQ plus community, homeless people, where he has vowed to arrest the less fortunate by the thousands and moving them to what the mainstream press has called tent cities, and his countless attacks on black folks throughout his time when he was sued for racial discrimination, the calling for the exonerated five to be executed, calling Haiti an asshole country, and of course much more. It is embodied in the chorus when Q-Tip puts Trump's own bigoted mantra that he espouses into the lyrics. It's a stark reminder of a hate-fueled man that pushes any citizen that is not white to the back of the line in American life. The album leads with the space program, a blisteringly honest assessment of life in the United States in the form of systemic inequality, inequity, and being black in America. Jerobi, who Q-Tip calls the spirit of the group, raps, "They planning for our future, people, none of our people involved," and makes a nod to political activism that is seen throughout the world when one sees the problems big government creates when learning the history of mankind. On Conrad Tokyo, a track featuring Kendrick Lamar and Jack White, Phife Dawg makes his feelings known on how SNL also normalized Trump, but the times don't call for it. Seeing the BS people spew in lieu of the country being ruined and dissent being seen as sipping the haterade from pro-capitalists and members of the MAGA movement. And that's just to name a few. Overall, wrote Boaz N., this album manages to highlight important social discussions surrounding minority injustices and advocates for unity and inclusion among all types of people, all while this clear vision is supported by light-hearted wittiness and the groovy, timeless sound that people have come to love of the group. Sadly, Jerobi White does believe that Phife Dawg, who was living in California and traveling back and forth from California to the East Coast to work with Q-Tip and others on this album, he thinks killed him. Toure would speak with White, who said, and he was very happy to go out like that. From the Times, its title is the one Phife wanted. What does it mean? I don't know, Q-Tip would say. We're just going with it because he liked it. Q-Tip would go on, it's so hard for me to sit in there and hear his voice. Sometimes I just have to take a break and walk away. It gets heavy. It doesn't necessarily get sad, it just gets heavy. I literally feel the energy from him when I hear his voice. The main message is this. It is about interconnectivity. It is about understanding the injustices that take place at the behest of an American government that has never seen people who are not predominantly white Christian men as the authority, as people who should be allowed and enabled into any space that they wish in American life. It is about reparations, or the lack thereof. It is about social equity, inequality. They call all of this out. And it feels like a grand opening, grand closing, because this was the album that marked their return after 18 years and then them putting it away forever. Days ago, the Columbus Dispatch released this disturbing video of white supremacist neo-Nazis marching through the streets of the Short North neighborhood in Columbus, Ohio.
I thought I heard him.
Locals looked on with horror and disbelief as the group shouted racial slurs and white supremacist slogans. Displays of hate like this go far beyond someone's race, ethnicity, and identity. They come from the absurdly false belief that a non-white person's mere existence poses an existential threat to a white person's existence, thus justifying the hatred and whatever violence they decide to inflict on others. Because these people don't think they're doing anything morally abhorrent, it makes combating the lies and hate they're spreading that much more vital in stopping this ideology from spreading more than it already has.
And there are literally Nazis shouting
The N-word, shouting profanities about Jewish people, walking the streets right now, and a megaphone.
Wow! Wow! Wow!
It should go without saying that anyone not condemning this to the fullest extent and calling it out for what it is, ethnic intimidation, racial abuse, a thinly veiled threat of violence against anyone willing to challenge these bigoted losers, and most sinisterly, the complete dehumanization of anyone who is not a white Christian.
We asked both President Biden and President-elect Trump about the Ohio incident. Biden responded denouncing the incident. We're waiting a response from Trump.
Gee, who could have guessed?
There's legitimate Nazis. Can you lock the door?
Local black community leaders staged a peaceful protest march in the wake of the hate spread in their community as Republican Governor Mike DeWine condemned the march. Unfortunately, though, this was by no means an isolated incident, because just a week before the march in Columbus, other neo-Nazis were spotted letting their hate flow outside of an American Legion post in Michigan.
And fear at a performance of the Diary of Anne Frank, not because of the disturbing details from her diary, but because of what was happening outside. Nazi flags being held by several people gathered outside of the production. This video shared on social media shows the demonstrators flying the Nazi flag outside the American Legion where the play was being performed.
Several individuals using masks to hide their faces, not only waving Nazi flags, but also reportedly shouting racist slurs.
Now, with all this in mind, the evidence you've seen so far, and the historical roots of the Nazi belief system, you'd think it'd be pretty cut and dry for one of the nation's highest paid news anchors to conclude that they politically align with the far right and the marginally less far right MAGA movement, but you'd be mistaken.
A group of neo-Nazis paraded through that city wearing, waving swastikas, covering their faces. This is not the first time this sort of thing has happened in Ohio in particular, and of course it's continuing to spread. We don't know what side of the aisle this comes from. I mean, typically neo-Nazis are for the far right.
Yeah.
You had protests from the far left at your house.
Correct.
As a Jewish member.
Yeah, they slept outside my house for days. You know, my takeaway is this has got to stop, and the surge of anti-Semitism is global, but it's certainly here in the United States, and it does require leaders on both sides of the aisle to say, don't do that.
Is your party doing that enough?
I think some in my party are doing a ton, and some are silent.
Yep, you heard that right. CNN's Dana Bash made the conscious decision to both sides literal neo-Nazis on national television. Now, we're speculating here, but the most logical explanation as to why she framed the story this way is to continue smearing anti-genocide protesters and critics of the Israeli government as equally anti-Semitic and an equal threat to Jewish people, as a literal hate group whose stated mission is to destroy the entirety of the Jewish existence. Not only is she muddying the waters and conflating real acts of anti-Semitism with critiques of the state of Israel's actions, but she is also manufacturing consent for the Israeli state to continue the slaughter of Palestinian civilians and the systemic erasure of their identity, being as charitable as possible. She could have at least used the abundance of resources she had available to her and pretend to be a journalist to do some real reporting to conclusively figure out what specific neo-Nazi group was responsible for the hate march. Clearly, that wasn't worth the effort and financial investment for her and CNN, which is unfortunately par for the course.
Many of these protests started peacefully with legitimate questions about the war. But in many cases, they lost the plot. The fear among Jews in this country is palpable right now. Protesting the way the Israeli government, the Israeli prime minister is prosecuting the retaliatory war against Hamas is one thing. Making Jewish students feel unsafe at their own schools is unacceptable.
Anti-Semitism is alive, and poses a very real threat to Jewish Americans and Jewish people all over the world, but leaving out key pieces of context, spewing easily debunkable propaganda talking points, and launching cynical smear campaigns against nonviolent anti-genocide protesters does far more to spread and normalize actual acts of anti-Semitism than combat them.